Hi, today I will be discussing DNA fingerprinting and VNTR analysis. I will be discussing a recent mystery that unfolded at my house when one of my dogs decided to chew up my shoe. Let's introduce you to my dogs and show you the evidence. Here is Sadie, Lily, Super, Gunny, and Jake. With a few notorious shoe chewers in the group, including Sadie, Super, and Jake, I do have some suspicions as to who chewed up my shoe, but I plan to find out for sure. I have not yet been able to determine which of my furry friend chewed up my shoe, but I managed to collect a hair sample that was left on the shoe. I also took fingerprint samples, or should I say paw print samples, from each of my dogs and will run a DNA fingerprint analysis against the hair that was left on the shoe. DNA was collected and then amplified for 2 different VNTR loci and ran on separate gels. These DNA fingerprinting gels can be used to compare the sample hair collected from the shoe and the DNA of my dogs. So now let's take a look at these gels and see if we can't get to the bottom of this. Here we have the 2 gels. The first is locus 1 and the second is locus 2. Each gel shows 2 alleles for each suspect, as well as the evidence, because dogs happen to be diploid, like humans. We can start by validating the gel by comparing Lily to Jake, because Lily is Jake's mother. Because Lily is Jake's biological parent, Jake should have inherited 1 allele from Lily at each locus. We can see that this holds true for both locus 1 and 2, because they share an allele here and here on locus 1, and here on locus 2. This is consistent with Lily being the biological parent of Jake, so both gels are validated. Before continuing to analyze the gels, it is important to note that if a suspect is guilty, their DNA will match the evidence DNA perfectly at both loci. First, looking at the VNTR locus 1 results, we can look at the bands and see which suspects we can rule out as not guilty. As we can see here, Sadie, Lily, and Gunny do not match the evidence at both alleles, so they are not guilty, which I have symbolized with a red X here, meaning their bands did not match the evidence. Even though Lily and Gunny did match the evidence at 1 allele, they must match at both alleles to be considered guilty, and because they only matched at 1, they are not guilty. Super and Jake did happen to match the evidence at both alleles, which means at this point they are guilty, which is symbolized here with a green check mark. Since both Super and Jake matched up with the evidence, we must look at VNTR locus 2 to determine who is the real culprit. Now, looking at VNTR locus 2, it is possible that some of the suspects who originally identified as not guilty identify as guilty now, like Gunny. Even though Gunny now matches up with the evidence and identifies as guilty on locus 2, we ruled him out on locus 1, and he would have to match at both loci in order to be guilty. So we only need to look at the 2 suspects who already identified as guilty on locus 1 and see if they really are guilty. So, we look at Super and Jake. Jake does not match up at either allele on this locus, so he is now identified as not guilty. This leaves Super as the only one on the guilty list. We can confirm this by looking here, and seeing that he matches up perfectly at locus 2 also, so he is indeed the guilty suspect. Now that I know that Super chewed up my shoe, I can work on training him not to do this in the future, and maybe I should start keeping my shoes in places he can't get to them, just to be safe. Here are the external sources I used for my video.